Chapter 4. Fulfilling a Purpose. Link needed a break after the excitement and terror of the fall. Before climbing onto the surface, however, he dove down to retrieve the Master Sword, which he'd released before passing into the ground. Thankfully, the lake wasn't that deep where he'd dropped it, so retrieving it wasn't difficult. Makes me wish I still had magnesis, though, he thought as he climbed up out of the pond. He carefully set the Master Sword down against a rock, and then began to strip his wet clothing off. His tunic was already in tatters, and his trousers weren't much better. He laid out his clothes in the sunlight, and then sat on the ground, wearing nothing but his underwear. The wind blowing across the sky island was chilly, but the summer sun overhead helped offset the chill enough to be bearable, quickly drying his skin. "You've said it several times now," he said, looking at Rauru's floating form. "You think you don't have much time left?" Rauru shook his head, and Link thought he heard the soft chiming of bells as the spirit did so. "I think not. My sister understood these matters far better than I. But the way I've heard it described is that my spirit can remain so long as it has an anchor. For me, that was my failing body. I died eons ago. But my power remained, largely thanks to my sacred stone." Link had no idea what a sacred stone was, but he didn't stop Rauru as he continued his explanation. "Even as my body deteriorated, my spirit remained, bound by the same sealing magic that bound Ganondorf. When that failed, however, we were both freed, as you experienced. My spirit was no longer bound to him, but it was still bound to my remaining arm. And when I gave that arm to you, my spirit was left adrift." Link looked down at his Zanai hand. He examined the bracer and the spot on the back of it where the tear-shaped stone had rested. "Ah, sacred stone," he thought. He looked back up at Rauru. "Are you sure? You sealed that thing, Ganondorf. You sealed him for so long. Could you do it again?" "No. No, not without my sacred stone. And even with it, I doubt I could manage it now. He had been growing stronger for a long time before you and Zelda arrived, and my power was failing." Rauru looked at him. "This is for the best, Link. Zelda felt that you would be Hyrule's only hope in your time. I'm more than willing to make this sacrifice to give you that chance." It pained Link to hear this. He was the hero, damn it. Was he not? He couldn't bear the thought of others sacrificing for his sake, even if he knew they were right. Thank you." He fell silent for a time before finally he spoke up once more. "Tell me about Zelda. Was she okay?" Rauru grew pensive. "The last I saw of her was the same place that I saw her in the present. Our battle to seal Ganondorf. She was essential in allowing me to get close enough to Ganondorf to do so. And she was able to time travel." The Zanai nodded. "Yes. Your Zelda became the Sage of Time." He paused, expression growing distant. "When she appeared before Sonia and I, we could sense immediately that she had great power. Not only that, but..." Distantly from the direction of the strange Temple of Time, a loud gong sounded. A flock of birds took flight from a nearby yellow-leaved tree. Rauru turned to look out towards the Temple of Time, expression thoughtful. "Interesting. One would think that after so long, the mechanisms that control that would have stopped functioning. Zelda, was she able to return home?" The Zonai looked back at Link. "I don't know. She was trying to find a way, and Zonya believed that, once Zelda mastered her powers, she might be able to. But then so much went wrong. Rauru's ears dropped slightly. I do not know what happened after I sealed Ganondorf. Link fell silent. It was all so much to consider. Zelda survived her fall, only to be thrust back into the ancient past where she happened to meet Azanai, the very one who would steal that creature beneath Hyrule and save Link's life. It made him think of the concepts of fate and divine machinations, things he had been happy to spend the last few years trying to forget. He had so many questions, but Rauru's words, that his spirit had only a little time left, gave him pause. What do I absolutely need to know before he's gone? Finally, he said, I want to know who this Ganondorf is, but first, I think you need to help me understand what else can be done with your hand. Yes, I agree. Link pushed himself to his feet, exhaling heavily. He still felt fatigued, irritatingly so. Perhaps it was just the altitude. Except he'd been high up before, though he may not have been this high when flying upon Va Meadow. His exhaustion felt deeper than thinning air. However, he felt in his legs, in his muscles, in his back, his arm, especially his Zanai arm. His body felt worn and overexerted. He didn't have a choice, though, as he gathered up his damp clothes. They hadn't been given nearly enough time to dry in the sun, but he did not particularly want to stay in his undershorts for this either. He slipped his tunic back on, grimacing at the way one sleeve was just gone. He left the lopsided undershirt off entirely. Next followed his trousers. These showed more wear than he'd expected to see. Holes were worn into the knees, and several places were noticeably frayed and thin. They hadn't been like that before, had they? He swept his hands back through his mane of hair, wishing he had a hair tie. He had one down in the caverns, but somewhere along the way, it had been lost. It was distracting, the way his hair kept falling over his eyes. Once Link was ready, Rauru led him away from the pond, past more of the trees with yellow leaves, into a wide open clearing. As they walked, Link found his curiosity piqued. He didn't recognize these type of trees. The grass, too, was a bright yellow golden color, despite feeling lush and healthy. And those weren't the only plants that he didn't recognize from his travels in Hyrule. There were bushes containing unfamiliar fruit and strange colored mushrooms growing on the ground. Rauru paused in the center of the clearing, and Link saw his ears perk. When Link opened his mouth to speak, the Zanai held up a hand, silencing him. Then Link heard it too, a soft, whirring sound, followed by a shrill, keening sound from right behind him. Link, look out! Instinct took over, and Link dove forward, tucking into a roll and coming up on the other side of Rauru. He whirled to see the foe before him, the broken Master Sword held tightly in his left hand. There, where he had just been, was a machine. At least that's what Link thought it was. The machine, floating a couple of feet off the ground and standing about as tall as Link, seemed to be constructed entirely of rings of various sizes stacked on top of one another. Its torso, head, and arms were made of these bands, appearing to be crafted from green and tan stone. Its head and arms floated above and out the sides of its torso, somehow connected by crackling blue energy. Each arm ended in a hand with 3 fingers. It had no legs. Its torso was short, thinner at the bottom and wider around the arm connections, while its head was slightly larger, possessing a cylindrical shape that tapered in the middle. The center of its face featured a stylized eye symbol reminiscent of the designs Link and Zelda had encountered below. It was topped by a sharp, blade-like horn that seemed more than capable of causing harm, even without the odd sword it held in its hand. The sword had a cylindrical hilt, with a blade composed of the same blue energy that held the machine's body together. It came at Link, still warbling its shrill alarm, eye glowing bright red, and swung its sword at him. Its arm could extend, and Link had no choice but to give up ground, lest he find out whether light could cut flesh. In his experience with ancient Sheikah weaponry, it would be able to. It approached again relentlessly, and as it wound its arm back to strike, Link jumped forward, stabbing out with the broken Master Sword, striking the machine right in the eye. The Master Sword bounced off with a sharp clang, and part of the melted and warped blade chipped off, the shard spinning off into the grass. The machine swung its blade-like horn down, nearly cleaving Link's head in two, and he barely got the Master Sword up in time to block. Too slow. He tried to put distance between himself and the construct, but it swung out at him, with its energy blade again. Link's block was sloppy, and the blow was strong enough that it broke his grip, sending the Master Sword spinning away. He was aware of Rauru saying something, commanding. Nothing he said made any sense to him. Either Rauru was speaking in a different language entirely now, or Link just didn't catch what he said. Defenseless, Link cursed and ducked under another series of swings. He glanced around, looking for any sign of something he could use in retaliation. Unfortunately, all he saw was a handful of fallen branches, and those would be worthless in a fight. Could he use his hand somehow? He glanced down at the Zanai hand, which pulsed with green light, but he failed to see any way he could be used. Perhaps he could pass through the machine and confuse it, but that still didn't give him any other way to counter its armor. He'd be willing to bet that the only thing that could pierce through its stone armor was its own energy sword. That gave him an idea, however. He stopped retreating and waited for the next attack. As he hoped, the machine wound its arm back and then thrust forward, the blade aimed right for Link's heart. As the blade approached, Link moved to the side, focusing his senses on that weapon. Everything around him slowed, though his ability to react wasn't hindered. From his perception, time crawled, and the machine's thrust was easy to avoid and capitalize on. He'd never discovered the reason he had this ability, which was thought to be related to the ancient Sheikah, but after so many years, using it was second nature to him. It had its limits, though he could easily change the flow of battle in moments with it. Moments truly were all he had to use it. Time would reassert its dominance over him soon enough, so he had to act quickly and decisively. He reached out with both his hands, wrapping them around the machine's three-fingered hand, sword, hilt, and all. Despite having arms made up of rings connected only by crackling energy, he felt a great deal of resistance as he worked to turn the blade. He thrust all his weight behind this attack, even as time lurched back into motion, much sooner than he expected. However, by then it was too late for the machine to react as Link turned its blade back on itself, thrusting it into the construct's chest piece. The machine died instantly. The crackling energy that held its head and arms aloft fizzled out, and its body fell to the ground in dozens of pieces. Link was left holding its disconnected hand, and the cylindrical hilt of its sword. The sword's blade had disappeared as soon as the machine died as well. He panted, sweat beading on his forehead. The entire fight had been over in a matter of seconds, yet his body felt as though it had been much longer. His heart raced, as if he'd been running, and in the aftermath of using his time-slowed abilities, he felt lightheaded. His legs shook slightly, and the muscle in his arms burned. His left arm, in particular, felt as though it was being stabbed by dozens of tiny needles. Gods, what is this? Is this the malice or the altitude? Excellent job, Link. I see now why Zelda spoke so highly of your combat prowess. Rauru floated closer, inspecting the crumbled machine. It was extremely clever to use its sword against it like that. Link sat on the ground, still trying to catch his breath now that the adrenaline was fading. He looked up at Rauru. I feel weak. I should have more stamina than this. That fight was over so fast. Rauru frowned as he gazed down at Link. Yes, I see. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully. But you must recall, the damage done to your body by Ganondorf was significant. It is entirely possible that, while I managed to save your life by replacing your arm, there was still significant harm done. Link grimaced, pressing his hand to his chest. How am I supposed to fight, if I get winded after seconds? You'll regain strength in time. His power loses its effectiveness when exposed to sunlight, and I do think my arm should counteract as well. You won't get worse, but it may take time for your body to recover. Link nodded. It wasn't that different when a soldier needed to recover from a near-fatal injury. Blood loss, physical trauma, broken bones. All sorts of injuries could weaken the body overall. He knew that. He just never truly expected it to happen to him. I don't have Mifa's protection to keep me going anymore, he muttered, scowling bitterly. I'm sorry? Nothing. Link turned his gaze on the hand and the sword hilt he still held. He pried the construct's fingers off the narrow cylindrical hilt and dropped the hand to the ground. He inspected the sword, turning it over in his hands. It was colored green and gold and was rounded on one end, while the other end had 3 fins that Link figured acted as an emitter for the energy blade. He frowned as he continued his inspection. Finally, he looked back up at Rauru, who was gazing down at the broken machine. Do you know how to work this? Rauru glanced back at Link, eyebrows raising. Oh, I don't believe you can. It was working just a minute ago. Yes, but it was being powered by this construct. Rauru motioned for the heap of scrap on the ground. That source of power, that sword is little more than a useless baton. The Sheikah did it better, Link thought, scowling. Great. That's just great. And do you know what that thing is? Rauru nodded. Yes. It is a soldier construct. I was there when it was made, or at least others like it. The fact that the machine was Zonai in origin didn't surprise Link, considering all he'd seen today. But Raru's words gave him pause. How old is it? I don't know. Rauru bent down, kneeling by the construct, although his legs still hovered a few inches off the ground. But I do not believe there was any way to manufacture these near here, unless things changed after I sealed Ganondorf, which would suggest that this machine has been active far longer than we expected it to be. Link grimaced, his thoughts traveling back to the ancient Sheikah Guardians, and the way those machines had turned on their makers, and those they were created to protect. Link had what he considered to be very healthy distrust for anything mechanical in nature. And now they've turned hostile. Oh no, that construct acted exactly as I might have expected. Ryder looked around at the distant Temple of Time. We created them, Link. My sister, Mineru, designed dozens of different types of constructs. There were soldier constructs, such as this, which existed to protect this sacred ground. Others were created for other purposes. Like what? I had a steward construct. Rauru shook his head. Insufferable machine. I'm quite certain that Mineru programmed it specifically to annoy me. But we also had constructs to cook, to clean, to build, to mine ore. Any number of uses, really. He paused, looking again at the broken machine. If the soldiers are still active, I wonder if others are too. I never imagined they might continue to carry out their tasks indefinitely, even after all purpose is gone. Link could see a deep frown forming on Raru's brow, and he decided to let him be for a moment. Instead, he rose and trudged over to where the Master Sword had flown. He found it easily, and was grateful to see that the sword hadn't broken any further by the blow that sent it flying. When he turned back, he found Raru's attention upon him again. Link slid the Master Sword back into his belt. He had no scabbard for now, and stepped closer to Rauru. Okay. Let's talk about what I can do with his hand. Yes. I have an idea for that. You still have the construct's weapon, do you not? Link nodded and produced the hilt from a pocket in his trousers. Excellent. Next, I will ask you to remove the blade from the construct's head. Doing so proved difficult, but Link finally managed it, after wrestling with it for a time. He effectively broke off the construct's head by stomping on it. It was a clean break, however, and afterwards, he left with a blade about as long as his forearm. It was sharp on only one side, and it had a golden sheen to it, while the dull edge was green. It matched the coloring of the sword hilt he held. Good. Now, Link, I'm going to try to teach you how to fuse the blade to the unpowered hilt. Link looked up at Rauru in confusion. What? What do you mean by that? Rauru floated closer. Zonai have an affinity for the forces of nature, especially connection between objects. You've already seen how you can pass into and through solid objects. I will now teach you how you can fuse two objects into one. Like glue? The Zonai chuckled. In a way. Though far stronger and long-lasting than any sort of glue I've ever encountered. Okay, what do I need to do? First, Ryder had Link do his best to slide the blade in between the trio of fins atop the hilt. That was easier said than done, but with some effort Link managed to wedge it in between two of them. That left the blade slightly lopsided, but It was about the best he figured he could manage. Good. Now, I want you to take the sword in your left hand. You are to hold it and focus your thoughts. Imagine that the two parts of the sword are inseparable. They want to be one. They want to be one? Link asked, brows raising as he transferred the cobbled-together sword into his Zanai hand. The Zanai shot him a look. Yes, they want to be one. Apart, they are incomplete, but together, they form a new whole. Link's gaze fell back on the sword, and he attempted to do as Rauru asked. He gripped the sword hilt with his Zanai hand tightly, and he impressed upon the sword just how nice it would be if it were whole. The blade fell off, sinking point first into the ground by his feet. I guess it disagrees with me, Link said wryly, as he bent to pick it up. You cannot force it with thought alone, Rauru said as Link wriggled the blade back into place. You must feel it. The certainty that you hold one single object in your hand. Link sighed and returned his mind to the task. Yet, after several more minutes or attempts, the sword was no more a single weapon than it was when the blade was still attached to the construct. You could just enter my arm again, Link said after sitting down on the ground. Show me how to do it. Rauru shook his head. Could you pass into the ground right now if you wished it? He considered that, and had to admit that Rauru was correct. Despite knowing it could be done, Link had no idea how to activate that ability. Finally, he said, Maybe it doesn't work for me. The only time your abilities worked was when you were in control. But perhaps we merely need to change tactics. I'm quite certain that your arm still holds the remnants of my powder within it. Rauru floated in a circle, pacing. Okay. Let's try another ability. Great. What's this one? I'm going to teach you how to extend your arm's influence beyond its flesh. Link looked up at Rauru, not understanding in the slightest what the Zanai meant by that. Rauru smiled. I'm going to teach you how to use telekinesis to manipulate objects without touching them. Link felt stupid. He stood there in the middle of the clearing, left hand extended forward, fingers outstretched. His right hand was braced against his left bicep, helping keep his Zanai arm aloft. It had begun to strain after just a couple of minutes, weighed down by its strange bracer. He focused his eyes on the Master Sword, which sat on the ground perhaps 10 feet away, and as he stretched his new hand toward it, he drew up the image in his mind of reaching out and plucking it from the ground. He imagined the green-gray fingers of his left hand wrapping around the hilt and lifting it cleanly into the air. The Master Sword sat resolutely still. Link exhaled in frustration. Damn it! This isn't working. The Zanai looked frustrated as well. He'd grown irritated with Link's lack of progress with any of his abilities, despite assuring Link that he still believed the abilities should work. Link wasn't nearly so certain at this point. He'd even tried to shove his hand through a tree, but that power had proved just as elusive. You must visualize yourself picking up the sword, Link. Picture in your mind, Link growled. I know, but I don't think it is going to work. My arm still holds power. Of that, I'm certain. Maybe so, but clearly I can't tap into it. Rauru's ghostly ears angled backwards, an indication of his frustration for what Link had been able to pick up. If Zanai technology, such as the door mechanism earlier, responds to you, then you clearly can. And how many times have you lopped off someone's arm and stuck yours on instead? Link shot back, cheeks growing heated. The Zanai looked taken aback, and Link immediately regretted his words. He sighed. Rauru, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. It's quite all right. I understand your frustration, your anger even. I'm not... Rauru spoke over him, and I acknowledge that I'm probably pushing you faster than should be reasonably expected. He looked down at his own ghostly left hand. I fear I do not have much time left now. Link felt even guiltier about his words and sighed, walking over and plucking the Master Sword off the ground, replacing it at his waist. When he turned back, Rauru's back was to him, eyes on the deep blue sky above. When Zelda appeared in my time, Sonia and I did not know what to make of her, he said, and his words sent a jolt of energy through Link and his mention of her. She seemed young, yet her power was great. However, she had no concept of how she had used it to travel through time, nor how to use it again. Link stepped up beside Rauru, joining him and looking up at the sky. A bird whirled overhead, wings outstretched as it rode the currents of air. Did she tell you about Calamity again? Her struggle to awaken her powers? Rauru nodded. Yes. And I sensed some of that same frustration in her as she attempted to master her own abilities over time. I suspect the difference then, however, was that she had a teacher in Sonya. So she mastered them. As well as she could hope, in the short time that she had to learn them. Link remained silent for several more seconds before he sighed. I guess after everything she went through to master her powers, I don't have anything to complain about. Ryder looked down at him, smiling faintly. You are ready to try again? Link blew out a heavy breath and walked over to where he'd set the two pieces that he'd been attempting to fuse into a sword earlier. Well, I figured I'd still need a weapon. Worked the blade onto the hilt and held it in his left hand. Do your best to relax, Rauru said as he floated over. Power is not about brute force, or even mental willpower. For us Zonai, it is simply an extension of our bodies. I made Link think back to his days of training with the sword. The way his father, and then his formal instructor, impressed him to think of the weapon. It was more than a tool to swing around. The sword needed to be an extension of his arm. Only when he could truly begin to see and feel the sword as a part of himself could he master it. At the time, there had been numerous exercises and drills that Link took part in, something he didn't have time for now, but perhaps this sword is more than a tool and more than a weapon, he thought, as he ran his fingers of his right hand along the blade, careful not to dislodge it. It is a part of me. A part. We are both defenseless and vulnerable, but together we are the weapon that protects the kingdom. In his mind, he stopped seeing himself as holding the two parts of the sword to be. Rather, he envisioned all three of them, himself, the hilt, and the blade, to be the whole. Individually they were broken, but together he felt it happen. As Link immersed himself in the familiarity of his sword training basics, he could sense the moment that his Zonai arm began to shine with the blue-green light. He felt the two pieces of the sword, where they met, where they failed to align. He felt them down to the smallest piece of matter, down to their very base components, down to the materials they were crafted with. He didn't have words for what he found, and yet he understood them in a way he had never before. Become one, he told them. In his mind's eye, he saw the completed sword, shorter than the bronze swords he preferred, but no less deadly when combined with his skill. He felt the blade align itself with the hilt, shifting slightly to straighten itself in response to his mental image. There was a flash of blue light, and when he opened his eyes, he saw that the sword glowed softly, but the light faded quickly. And it was a sword in his hand now. The blade was well and truly attached to the hilt, by what appeared to be blue-green light. When he attempted to wrench them apart again, he found that the blade was firm. The two had become one. Yes, Link, that's it, Rauru said, hovering closer to admire Link's handiwork. Perfect. Link gave the sword a few practice swings, considering its balance. The hilt was thinner than he was used to, and he couldn't shake the feeling that it would shatter from one good blow. But it would do in this dire circumstance. Finally, he looked at Rauru, meeting the spirit's eyes, and smiled. Well, I guess you were right. An hour later, Link thought he was starting to get the hang of the abilities granted to him by his arm. He thrust his hand out, now pulsing brightly with inner power, and lifted a stone from the ground. Despite being a good 10 feet away, he could just barely feel the stone's weight in his hand. Once he had the stone hovering in the air, he rotated it, and then thrust his arm to the side, sending it zipping off to the side. He attempted to arrest its movement, to bring it back in an arc like a very misshapen boomerang, but he lost his mental grip on it. The stone sailed through the air a few more feet before falling to the ground. "Ah, almost had it," Link said, reaching up and wiping sweat off his brow. The glow in his arm faded as he released the power. All around him were strange sights that certainly would not have occurred in more natural settings. There was an upright stack of 10 rocks, each set atop each other, with the bottommost fused to the ground. There were broken branches that had been fused back together. In the center of the clearing was the construct, upright with its head fused to its body, arms formed by a pair of long sticks. It looked like a ridiculous snowman. Link thought Zelda would find it funny. He'd also begun to get a feel for how to use the ability to pass into solid objects. It wasn't that functionally different than fuse, and that it required himself to visualize as being a part of whatever he wished to pass through. But of the powers granted to him by Rauru's arm, it was the one that he felt least comfortable with. Mostly because he couldn't quite get a feel for how to move once he had passed into the ground. More than once in his experimentation with it, Rauru had to take control of Link's hand to help to keep him from falling straight through the ground of the Sky Island and out the other side. But it was progress, at least. "Let's take a break," Rauru said. He turned him again, floating away, following a path that would take them out of the clearing of trees. Link didn't argue, but instead looked to the place where he had set his Zanai sword on the ground. He reached out with his hand, picturing what he wanted to happen in his mind. At once the sword leaped off the ground and flew into his outstretched palm, hilt first. Grinning, he turned and followed Rauru out of the forest. The sun had risen in the sky now, and Link plucked an apple from a tree as they emerged. The rest of the Sky Island lay before them, and Link found that there were several things that he hadn't noticed before, such as the fact that while there was a large central island, there were easily a dozen or so other islands around or above it as well. The island's center, which held the Temple of Time, had numerous ponds, groves of trees, and a handful of dilapidated old buildings. "Rauru, how long ago was your time?" Link asked, frowning at the buildings. Most of them, other than the Temple of Time, were in various states of disrepair, true, but that any of them stood at all was surprising. Rauru stroked his jaw. "I do not know. But it was more than 10,000 years ago, right?" The Zanai looked at him. "You are referring to the event called the Great Calamity. Yes, that happened some time after I sealed Ganondorf, though I could not tell you how long." "Then how is the Temple of Time still standing? And the other buildings, like those ones, or the ones you brought me to?" Link asked, glancing back up and around at the floating island far above them. "I suspect it must be the caretaker constructs. Look." He pointed out towards a grove of trees. Link frowned and peered closer, and only then did he see a machine with an axe approaching one of the trees. There were several felled trees near it, as well. See, some continued to work, despite the ages that have passed. I suspect that for a long time, they maintained and even rebuilt many of the buildings here. Link watched the machine swing its axe at the tree. It was similar in size to the soldier construct, but had a different design with a longer neck and arms. It was too far away to make out any better details, however. Rauru began floating down a set of stairs that had mostly been overtaken with nature, with grass poking out of the cracks in the stone. At the base of the stairs, Link noticed an odd statue of sorts. It was mostly green, with a cylindrical base ending in a round dome. It had 4 identical attachments arrayed around the dome, each looking like a big white egg atop a lampstand. As he got closer, he noticed that each of the eggs bore a texture that looked like a lizard's scales. Or maybe a closed lotus flower, Link thought, thinking of some of the flowers he'd seen near the Lanayru wetlands. The statue's cylindrical base was hollow, comprised of 3 wide rings stacked atop each other, with an opening down the center of each. He saw one of the Zanai eyes on the front of the dome, orange amidst the green. Below the eye was a white section that formed a curved band that protruded from the rest of the dome slightly. The whole thing was made of similar stonework, as the soldier construct had been, with various circular and swirl patterns carved into it. It was made entirely of this stone, except for a black circle of glass in the middle of the white band. As soon as he approached the statue, that black circle lit up with a bright, yellow symbol. though it was somewhat obscured by the accumulation of dust. It was a circle with, well, Link wasn't sure what was in the middle of it. It looked somewhat like a feather duster, or a broom. Maybe a bell? The statue shifted, causing dust to fall from it, and he swore, jumping back and drawing his Zanai sword. The thing shifted again, causing more dust to fall, and Link heard a soft whirring sound emanating from it. "Peace, Link. This will not be a threat to you," Rauru said, his voice betraying curiosity. Suddenly the statue expanded, the front of its dome extending and rising on a long neck of floating rings, held aloft on a crackling beam of blue energy. As this occurred, a pair of long arms, each ending in a 4-fingered hand, extended out from within the rings of its base, which had also separated and extended. The whole thing had begun floating a few inches off the ground. The construct's head dropped, its long neck bending it lower to be level with Link's eyes. It had 2 of the lotus flower shapes on either side of its oval-shaped face, with a pair of what he thought were large stone earrings in the shape of the Zanai eye, dangling from each lotus. Link stood his ground, still gripping his sword tightly in his left hand, but didn't attack. He couldn't see any sign of a weapon on this construct. He thought it must look just like the construct he'd seen chopping down trees. The construct's head retreated, lifting and gazing down at him, now standing about as tall as Rauru would have, had his feet been on the ground. Then it spoke. "Please confirm that you are the one called Link." Its voice was mechanical, not unlike the machine Robbie had made, which he called his ancient oven or cherry when his wife wasn't around, and it spoke in perfect Hylian, lacking even the accent that Rauru had. "What?" Link looked from the construct to Rauru, who looked equally as surprised as he felt. "Please confirm that you are the one called Link." Yes, I'm Link." The construct whirred softly for a moment. "Link, I have waited for you." "Waited for me? How? Why? How did you even know I'd be here?" "Zelda instructed me to wait, and give you her pad when you arrived." It's more that day. Link felt as though the ground had given out beneath him. The sword fell out of his limp grip, clattering on the stone ground. "Zelda." "What? Zelda spoke to you? When? Where?" His heart raced with implication. Zelda had been here. She'd spoken with this very machine. The white band across the machine's torso slid forward, revealing itself to be a drawer. Link took a step forward, looking in amazement, to find Zelda's pad within, pristine and whole, resting on an old cloth. Link reached in and picked it up with reverent hands. It was a bit dusty, and he wiped some of that away before turning it over to see the ancient Sheikah eye glowing on its glass face. "Zelda." Dread grew within Link. The construct had not said how long it had been waiting for Link to arrive, and the presence of so much dust on it suggested that Zelda hadn't spoken to it earlier that day. He looked sharply back up at the construct. "When did Zelda give this to you? How long have you had this?" "Link," Rauru said, voice soft. The construct tilted its head at Link once more, roaring softly. "My internal chronometer ceased functioning an indeterminate amount of time ago. I am unable to ascertain how long it has been since that failure. However, my records indicate that 1,724 years passed from the time that Zelda placed the pad into my care before my chronometer ceased." No. Link trembled with this new blow to his hopes of finding Zelda. Why would she have given up her pad if she had discovered a way to make her way back to the present? He looked down at the device again, horrified. "Zelda also wished for me to inform you that she is waiting for you within the Temple of Time." Hope burst alive within Link once more. "She is? She's here?" "This is the Guardian of Time. She is waiting for you within the Temple of Time." Rauru grinned broadly. "So she did find the way to return." Link laughed and took off running.